Hey kiddos, so unfortunately I did skip a problem on the practice test, so I am going to share my screen and we are going to go over the last practice test question that I haven't done for you yet. This would be question number 14 on your practice test, okay? So let's get into it. It says plans for a new assisted living facility includes a courtyard that will contain a fountain, planting beds, and several seating areas. A drawing of the courtyard is shown below. Use the scale on the drawing to determine the actual length of X and Y, as well as the actual area of the entire courtyard. Drag and drop the values for each measurement in the boxes below. All right, so again, they're giving us this picture of the assisted living facilities courtyard, where you can see the fountain and the planting beds. And you can also see on the drawing the letters X and Y. And those are the first items that we need to calculate the actual length of. It also tells us that there is a scale at the bottom of the picture, and that is the scale that we're going to be using to calculate these pieces of information. So I'm going to block out part of my screen so I can go over how to do this with you. And the first thing I'm going to remind you of is whenever we're using scale or proportions of any kind, we are going to create what I call a setup. And so the setup is going to be using this scale. We are going to compare our boxes or our units to the number of feet in actual life that this courtyard will be. All right, so I'm using the word boxes instead of the word units because in order for me to actually be able to use this type of scale, I need to use boxes. All right, so it says for every 2 units or 2 boxes on this particular picture, it represents 6 feet in real life. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and create that fraction using those numbers instead of these labels. So instead of the word boxes, I'm going to use 2, and instead of the word feet, I'm going to use 6. All right, so I just took the scale and wrote it as a fraction. The next thing that I need to do is I need to count the actual number of boxes so that I can compute or figure out the length of X in real life. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and count the number of boxes long that the length of X is, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes long. So what I'm going to do down here in this proportion is I'm going to now say if I have 6 boxes, I need to figure out how many feet long in real life that is. Okay, so I'm going to solve this. I'm going to actually create what I call a proportion. And so instead of this letter, or instead of this question mark, I'm going to replace the question mark with a variable. We're going to use X. All right, so I now have a proportion, and I am lucky that I can solve it the easy way. I can say, well, I know how to get from 2 to 6. All I need to do is to times it by 3, and whatever I do to the top, I'm going to do to the bottom. So 6 times 3 is 18. All right, that means that the actual length of the fountain for X is 18 feet. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the letter Y. So instead of using this setup that I have for X, I'm going to replace it with a new setup. Whoops, I need that to be white. All right, so I'm now going to use the same fraction to begin with from my scale, that 2 boxes represents 6 feet. And now I'm going to count the number of boxes wide that letter Y is. So I'm going to count it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes wide. So I'm going to create my fraction of 5 boxes wide over X. I don't know how many feet that is in real life. Now here's an example of when I can't just figure out how to get from 2 to 5. I don't know what I multiply by 2 to give me 5. So instead of doing it that way, I'm going to use cross products. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and multiply 6 times 5. And I'm going to say that that's the same as multiplying 2 times x. I'm going to rewrite this over here so it makes sense. All right, so 6 times 5 equals 2 times x. I'm going to go ahead and do the math over here on the left side. 6 times 5 is 30. And then to solve this equation, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I get that x is 15. So what does that represent? That represents that the length, or I should say the width of y is 15 feet. All right, so I've got 2 out of the 3 different questions that I need to have done for this problem. So at least I feel really confident knowing that I'm going to get 2 out of the 3 parts right. Even if I get this last part right, I've still done better than 50%, right? All right, so I'm going to erase all this stuff except for the number of feet that I've figured out. And I'm going to read this last part of the question and see what I need to do for it. All right, so the last piece of the question then tells me that I need to determine the actual area of the entire courtyard. All right, so that's not so easy to do because I've got to do a lot of extra math in order to find the area. Plus, in this particular problem, this is what we call a complex figure. It is made up of 2 different sized rectangles, right? So in order for us to find the area of it, we need to not only find the area of these 2 separate shapes, but we then need to add those 2 areas together. So there are a couple of ways that I can do this. What I do want to tell you guys is that we can approach this in 2 completely opposite ways. The first way is to understand that area is represented by the number of boxes or squares inside of each shape. So to find the area of the fountain, I could literally count the number of boxes on the inside, but that would give me the number of boxes, which is not the number of feet. Remember that this is still a scale drawing and it's not the actual. And our goal is to determine the actual area. So what I think I would do if I were approaching this problem is I would try to calculate the number of feet for both the length and the width of each of the separate rectangles. So that's how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to start by counting boxes, and I'm going to look at this fountains picture first. I want to know how wide it is. It's like we said, 18 feet long, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes long. Let's see how wide it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes wide. It's a perfect square. So that makes this actually much easier for me because now I know that the length and the width are the same. And so I can call the width 18 feet as well. Right, I'm going to do the same thing for the planting beds rectangle. However, I don't think that it's a square. I can tell just by looking at it that it's not. So I might need to do some math here. So let's count how long it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes long. So in order for me to figure out what that is in feet, I'm going to go and do another proportion. Okay, so I'm going to block out all of this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and create that fraction again that compares the boxes to the feet. All right, and remember in our scale, it tells us that 2 boxes equals 6 feet, and I just counted 4 boxes, and so I need to know how many feet that is. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the easier way, which is to get from 2 to 4, I times it by 2. Whatever I do to the top, I'm going to do to the bottom, and 6 times 2 is 12. That tells me that the width or the bottom section here is 12 feet wide. All right, so now that I have all the dimensions, I am going to remind you that to find the area of any rectangle or square, the easiest thing to do is to multiply the length times the width. Okay, and in a square, we just call it a side times a side because they're the same. But what we're going to do now is we're going to approach finding the area of each of these shapes. All right, so for the fountain, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna multiply the 18 feet times the 18 feet, and that's gonna give me the total area. So you would be using Desmos, I'm gonna use my calculator, and I get 324 when I multiply 18 times 18. Right, now I'm gonna find the area of the planting beds. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same strategy. I'm gonna multiply 15 times 12. That's the length from here to here of the planting beds times the width, which is here to here, which we found out was 12 feet. And 15 times 12 is 180. So the last thing for me to do is to take those two areas and to add them together, because the area of the fountain, which is right here, the area of the fountain is 324, and the area of the planting beds is 180 feet. And so to get the total area combined, I'm going to add these two together. All right, so 4 plus 0 is 4, 8 plus 2 is 10, 3 plus 1 plus 1 is 5. Okay, so the total area for that courtyard is 504 feet. And we call those square feet because we're counting squares or boxes. And I would put a little square here, right? So I have all three of my answers. I know that I'm going to use 504 for the overall area. I know that I'm going to use 18 for the length of the fountain. And I know that I'm going to use the number 12 for the width or the length of the planting beds. And those are the numbers that I would drag into those appropriate areas on the test. Okay, go ahead and copy it down, take down your notes so you know how to do this problem on the actual test.